A man stands alone in a dark alley, his breath steady despite the chaos erupting around him. Three bodies lie at his feet, dispatched in seconds, their weapons still warm in their lifeless hands. He doesn't flinch, he doesn't hesitate. This is Kine Ashford, and for 30 years, he has been the shadow that governments fear and criminals pray they never meet. But tonight is different. Tonight, the hunter becomes the hunted. He feels it before he sees it. The red dot dancing across his chest, the distant click of a sniper settling into position. And for the first time in 3 decades, Kine Ashford smiles because he knows exactly who sent them. And he knows this is how his story ends. What he doesn't know is that his story is only beginning, because in a world where heroes are supposed to save kingdoms and protect the innocent, someone has to deal with the ones who don't. Someone has to eliminate the heroes who became worse than the villains they were summoned to destroy, and the gods have chosen the perfect weapon for this task. They've chosen a hitman. Let me take you back to where this all started. Not in some fantasy realm of magic and monsters, but in the cold, calculated world of modern espionage. Kine Ashford wasn't born a killer, he was made into one. Orphaned at the age of 7 when his parents died in what officials called a gas explosion but was actually a targeted assassination meant for someone else, young Kine was taken in by the only organization that saw potential in his dead eyes, the Continental, they called themselves. A shadow network that existed in the cracks between governments, taking contracts that official agencies couldn't touch. By 15, he had completed his first assignment. By 20, he had a reputation that made senior operatives nervous. By 30, he was considered a myth by most intelligence agencies. The ghost of Berlin, the specter of Shanghai. The names varied depending on which country's files you were reading, but they all described the same impossible phenomenon: a man who could infiltrate any facility, eliminate any target, and vanish without leaving a trace. His body count over 3 decades numbered in the hundreds. Politicians who were about to expose international secrets. Criminal lords who had grown too powerful. Rogue agents who knew too much. Kine didn't ask questions about why they needed to die. That wasn't his job. His job was to make them stop breathing, and he was exceptionally good at it. But even legends grow tired. Even monsters want peace. On his 53rd birthday, Kine submitted his resignation to the Continental. 30 years of perfect service, not a single failed mission, not a single captured operative, not a single loose end. He had earned his retirement. The director, a woman whose real name nobody knew, accepted his resignation with a thin smile and wished him well. That should have been the end of it. 3 days later, Kine was walking through the streets of Prague when he felt the familiar sensation of being watched. Not by one person, by many. He counted at least 7 operatives positioned around the square, all trying very hard to look like tourists. They were Continental agents, his former colleagues. So that's how it would be. The organization couldn't risk letting someone with his knowledge and skills roam free. He should have expected this. In 30 years of service, he had never seen anyone successfully retire. He had always assumed they simply chose to stay. Now he understood the truth. The Continental didn't allow retirement. The first assassin came at him near the fountain. Kine broke his arm in 3 places and left him unconscious before anyone in the crowd noticed something was wrong. The second tried a drive-by approach on a motorcycle. Kane sidestepped at the last moment, grabbed the rider's helmet, and used his own momentum to send him crashing into a vendor's cart. 3 more came at him in an alley. He killed them all in under 40 seconds. It wasn't even challenging. These were good operatives, but he had trained most of them himself. He knew their techniques because he had taught those techniques, but the Continental had anticipated this. They knew sending ordinary agents would only result in body bags, so they sent something else. They sent Vex. Kine hadn't seen his former student in over a decade. The boy he had personally recruited from the slums of Moscow, trained in every lethal art he knew, and molded into what many considered the second most dangerous assassin in the world. The first most dangerous, of course, being Kine himself. Vex appeared on the rooftop overlooking the alley, a sniper rifle cradled in his arms like an old friend. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The red dot on Kine's chest said everything. For a long moment, teacher and student stared at each other across the gap between buildings. Kane could see the conflict in Vex's eyes. The boy had always been emotional, too attached to the people around him. It was his greatest weakness. Cain had tried to train it out of him, but had never fully succeeded. Cain made no attempt to flee. He simply stood there, hands at his sides, watching the young man he had raised struggle with the choice before him. Then Bex pulled the trigger. The bullet struck Cain's chest with enough force to send him staggering backward. He looked down at the spreading bloom of red on his shirt, then back up at the rooftop. Bex was already gone. Professional to the end, Cain thought as he slid down the alley wall. At least I taught him that much. What? The world grew dark around the edges. His heartbeat slowed. His legendary reflexes failed him as his hands fell limply to his sides. After 30 years of dancing with death, it had finally caught up to him. Cain Ashford died in a dirty alley in Prague, surrounded by the bodies of lesser men, killed by the only student he had ever been proud of. And then he opened his eyes somewhere else entirely. The first thing Cain noticed was the light. It wasn't the harsh fluorescent glare of a hospital or the dim flicker of street lamps. This light seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, soft and golden like sunlight filtered through honey. The second thing he noticed was that his chest didn't hurt anymore. He looked down to find pristine white robes draped over a body that felt younger, stronger, more vital than it had in decades. The third thing he noticed was that he wasn't alone. They stood in a circle around him. 12 figures so beautiful it almost hurt to look at them. Their features seemed to shift and change depending on what angle he viewed them from. Sometimes they appeared human, sometimes they appeared as something far older and far stranger. One of them stepped forward. She was tall, with silver hair that cascaded down her back like a waterfall of moonlight, and eyes that contained entire galaxies within their depths. "You are Cain Ashford," she said. Her voice didn't seem to come from her mouth, but from everywhere at once, resonating in his bones. "The greatest assassin your world has ever produced." Cain remained silent. He had learned long ago that speaking first was usually a mistake. Let them talk. Let them reveal their hand. "We are the divine council of the realm known to its inhabitants as Therion," she continued, "and we have been searching for someone like you for a very long time." Another figure spoke up, this one appearing as an elderly man with a beard that seemed to be made of actual fire. 300 years ago, we summoned heroes from another world to save Therion from the Demon King's armies. 5 chosen ones, blessed with extraordinary powers. They succeeded in their task. The Demon King was slain. Therion was saved. "But something went wrong," said a third deity, this one taking the form of a young child with ancient knowing eyes. "The heroes were supposed to return to their world after the war ended. Instead, they chose to stay. They claimed lands. They gathered followers. They built empires. And then," said the silver-haired goddess, "they began to rule. At first, it was benevolent. They shared their knowledge. They protected the weak. They were everything heroes were supposed to be. But power corrupts," the bearded god interjected. "And absolute power corrupts absolutely. 300 years of life. 300 years of worship. 300 years of no one being able to challenge them. The heroes who saved Therion have become its greatest threat." Cain finally spoke. "And you want me to kill them?" The Divine Council exchanged glances that seemed to contain entire conversations. "We cannot directly intervene in mortal affairs," the silver-haired goddess explained. "Such actions would violate the primordial compact that binds all divine entities. But we can choose champions." "Would we?" "We can bestow gifts, and we can hope that those champions use those gifts wisely." The childlike deity smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. "You, Cain Ashford, have spent your entire life ending the lives of those who needed to die. You have no hesitation, no mercy, no compunctions about killing those the world considers powerful or important. You are exactly what Tharion needs," the bearded god finished, "a killer of heroes." Cain considered this for a long moment. In his former life, he would have asked about payment, about extraction plans, about the specific parameters of the contract. But he was dead now. What use did a dead man have for money? Instead, he asked a different question. "Why should I believe they deserve to die?" The silver-haired goddess raised her hand, and suddenly Cain's mind was flooded with images. Villages burned to ash because their inhabitants couldn't pay the heroes tribute. Young women taken from their families to serve in the palaces of immortal warriors. Entire nations crushed under the heel of those who claimed to be their saviors. He saw the hero of flames laughing as he incinerated a merchant who had dared to argue about prices. He saw the hero of light blessing crusaders as they marched to war against anyone who questioned the church's authority. He saw the hero of shadows running an empire of assassins and thieves from his fortress of eternal night. He saw the hero of storms demanding virgin sacrifices to appease his manufactured wrath. And he saw the hero of earth sitting on a throne made from the bones of those who had opposed her rule. 5 heroes, 5 monsters wearing the skin of saviors. When the visions ended, Kain's jaw was tight with barely suppressed rage. He had killed many terrible people in his life, but even he had lines he wouldn't cross. These heroes hadn't just crossed those lines, they had erased them entirely. "I'll do it," he said. The divine council seemed pleased. "Very well," the silver-haired goddess replied. "We will grant you a new body in Therion and certain gifts to aid you in your task. But understand this. The heroes have grown immensely powerful over 3 centuries. Killing them will not be easy. Even with our blessings, you may fail. You may die again, this time with no second chance." Cain smiled, and it was a cold, predatory smile that had made grown men weep in his previous life. "I've been doing the impossible for 30 years. What's 5 more targets?" The childlike deity giggled. "I like this one. He has the right attitude." One by one, the gods stepped forward to bestow their gifts. From the god of shadows, he received the ability to blend into darkness, to move without sound, to become invisible to all mundane senses. From the goddess of poison, he received immunity to all toxins and the knowledge of how to create them. From the god of blades, he received perfect mastery of any weapon he touched. From the goddess of death, he received the ability to sense life forces and extinguish them with a touch. From the god of mind, he received resistance to mental manipulation and the power to read surface thoughts. Gift after gift was bestowed upon him until Cain could feel power thrumming through his new body like electricity through a wire. It was intoxicating. It was terrifying. It was exactly what he needed. Finally, the silver-haired goddess stepped forward one last time. "And from me," she said, "you receive the most important gift of all, the system. It will help you track your growth, identify your targets, and navigate a world very different from your own." A translucent blue panel appeared before Cain's eyes, filled with information about his new body, his abilities, and his mission objectives. "Go now," the goddess said. "Begin your hunt. And may the guilty find no peace until they answer for their crimes." The world dissolved around him in a flash of golden light. When Cain next opened his eyes, he was lying in a forest clearing, staring up at a purple sky with 3 moons hanging overhead. His new body felt strange but strong, young, perhaps in its early 20s based on the muscle tone and reflexes. He sat up slowly, taking stock of his surroundings. Dense forest on all sides. No immediate threats detected. The air smelled of pine and something else, something that tingled in his nostrils. Magic, he realized. The air itself was saturated with magical energy. The system panel was still visible in his peripheral vision, waiting patiently for his attention. He focused on it, and it expanded to fill his view. "Welcome, host," it read. "You have been reincarnated in the kingdom of Valenheim, located in the eastern region of Tharion. Your current identity has been established as Cain Blackwood, a traveling merchant from the distant nation of Serath. Documentation has been provided in your belongings." Cain looked around and spotted a pack leaning against a nearby tree. Inside, he found traveling papers, a modest amount of currency, and a simple set of weapons, including a pair of daggers, a short sword, and a small crossbow. Current objectives, the system continued. Primary, eliminate the 5 heroes. Secondary, gather information on hero locations and vulnerabilities. Tertiary, establish a network of contacts and resources. The panel then displayed information about each hero, their last known locations, and their estimated power levels. Cain studied the information carefully, his tactical mind already working through possible approaches. The hero of flames, Aldrich the Burning was currently residing in the volcanic region known as the Ashlands, where he ruled as an unchallenged tyrant. His power level was listed as catastrophic, with the ability to reduce entire cities to cinder. The Hero of Light, Celestine the Radiant, served as the head of the Church of the Five, a religious organization that worshipped the heroes as divine beings. Her power was more subtle, but no less dangerous, with the ability to blind, burn, and purify anything she deemed unholy. The Hero of Shadows, Marcus the Unseen, controlled the criminal underworld from a network of hidden bases scattered across the continent. He was considered the most paranoid and difficult to locate of the five. The Hero of Storms, Tobias the Thunderlord, dwelt in a floating fortress above the Tempest Sea, demanding tribute from coastal nations in exchange for not destroying them with hurricanes. And the Hero of Earth, Gaia the Unbreaking, had carved out a kingdom in the mountain ranges where she was worshipped as a living goddess by her subjects. 5 heroes, 5 death sentences. And Kind had no idea how long he had to complete his mission before the corruption spread too far to stop. He decided to start with reconnaissance. Before he could kill anyone, he needed to understand this new world, its politics, its powers, its vulnerabilities. He had spent 30 years learning how to research targets on Earth. The same principles would apply here, just with different sources. The nearest city, according to his documentation, was called Thornwood, a 3-day walk through the forest. I was in a real patient side body. It would give him time to test his new abilities and get used to his new body. Kane shouldered his pack and began walking toward the setting sun. Over the next 3 days, he discovered just how much his new body could do. The gift from the god of shadows allowed him to fade into nearby shadows at will, rendering him effectively invisible as long as he remained still. The gift from the god of blades made his practice sessions with the daggers feel like remembering something long forgotten rather than learning something new. And the gift from the goddess of death let him sense the life forces of creatures in the forest around him, from the smallest insects to the largest predators. He also discovered that this world had monsters, real monsters, not the human variety he was used to dealing with. On the second day, he encountered a creature the system identified as a shadow bear, a massive ursine beast with black fur that seemed to absorb light and claws capable of rending steel. The fight lasted less than a minute. Kind's new reflexes were beyond anything he had possessed in his previous life, allowing him to dance around the creature's clumsy swipes and deliver precise, lethal strikes to its vital points. When it finally collapsed, the system informed him that he had gained experience points and offered him a chance to absorb some of the creature's essence. He accepted and felt a surge of power as his connection to shadows grew stronger. By the time he reached Thornwood, Kane felt comfortable in his new body. Not fully adjusted, but functional, ready to begin the real work. Thornwood turned out to be a modest city of perhaps 50,000 inhabitants, built around a massive thorn tree that had apparently stood for over a millennium. The tree gave the city its name and served as its center, with the noble quarter built into its branches and the common folk dwelling in the surrounding buildings. Kine entered through the main gate, presenting his documentation to bored-looking guards who barely glanced at his papers before waving him through. Security was lax. That was useful information. He spent the first few days simply observing, listening to conversations in taverns, reading public notices, buying drinks for talkative locals. The picture that emerged was disturbing. The 5 heroes were not merely corrupt rulers, they were objects of worship. The Church of the Five had spread across the entire continent over the past 3 centuries, preaching that the heroes were divine beings who had descended from heaven to save mortal kind. Questioning the heroes was heresy, criticizing them was blasphemy, and resisting them was suicide. But beneath the surface of compliance, Kane sensed something else: fear, resentment, the kind of simmering anger that came from decades of oppression. The common folk smiled and praised the heroes in public, but in private, behind closed doors and hushed voices, they told different stories. Stories of villages destroyed on whims. Stories of families torn apart. Stories of anyone who showed too much potential being quietly removed before they could threaten the hero's power. And then there were the resistance. Kind first heard the word whispered in a back alley tavern, spoken by a one-eyed merchant who had clearly had too much to drink. The resistance, the man mumbled. They're still out there, still fighting, still believing. When Kine pressed for more information, the merchant sobered up immediately and claimed he had said nothing. But the seed was planted. Somewhere out there, people were actively opposing the heroes. If he could find them, they could provide valuable intelligence, resources, maybe even allies. But first, he needed a way in, and that meant proving himself. The opportunity came 2 weeks later in the form of a tax collector named Lord Corvinus. The man was not one of the 5 heroes, but he served them faithfully, extracting tributes from the common folk to fund the heroes' endless wars and building projects. It was feared throughout Thornwood for his cruelty and his willingness to make examples of anyone who couldn't pay. Cain watched him for several days, learning his patterns. The Lord traveled with a contingent of 12 guards, all of them former soldiers who had chosen to serve power rather than principles. He visited the same tavern every evening, drank the same wine, and left at the same time. He stayed in a fortified manor on the edge of the noble quarter, protected by walls, wards, and a reputation that made most would-be thieves look elsewhere. None of that mattered to Cain. He struck on the 7th day of observation. Corvinus and his guards were returning from the tavern, slightly drunk and relaxed after an evening of self-congratulation. They never saw the shadow that detached from the alley wall. Cain took out the rear guards first, 2 quick strikes to the back of the neck that severed spinal cords before they could make a sound. Then the middle guards, daggers finding gaps in their armor with surgical precision. By the time the forward guards realized something was wrong, half their number was already dead. Lord Corvinus tried to run, his legs were too slow. His escape was cut off by a figure that seemed to materialize from the darkness directly in front of him. Please, the Lord begged. I have gold. I can give you anything you want. Cain studied him with cold eyes. You collected taxes from a widow whose husband died in the mines. When she couldn't pay, you sold her children into slavery. Do you remember? The Lord's face went pale. That was business. The law requires payment. Cain nodded slowly. Then, this is business too. The law requires payment for crimes against the innocent. Your payment is due. The death was quick. Cain had never been one for torture or dramatic speeches. Efficiency was its own form of mercy. He left the bodies where they lay, a message to anyone who might be watching. The tax collector was dead. The tribute would not be collected. And somewhere in Thornwood, someone would hear about this and wonder if the resistance had finally found a champion. The response came 3 days later. Cain was eating breakfast in his rented room when he felt a presence behind him. His combat instinct screamed at him to move, to strike, but he forced himself to remain still. Whoever had gotten past his wards and traps without triggering them was not an ordinary threat. You killed Corvinus, a female voice said. Cain didn't turn around. He did. We've been watching you since you arrived in Thornwood. You move like a predator. You observe like a spy. And you kill like someone who has done it many times before. Cain finally turned. The woman standing behind him was young, perhaps mid-20s, with short red hair and a scar that ran from her left eyebrow to her jaw. Her clothing was simple and practical, the kind favored by those who might need to move quickly at any moment. What gave me away? Cain asked. She smiled slightly. Nothing, actually. You're very good, but we have ways of detecting intent. Your aura practically screams bloody purpose. When Corvinus died, we knew you were the one responsible. And now we'd like to talk. The resistance is always looking for talented individuals, and talent like yours doesn't come along very often. Cain studied her for a long moment, reading her surface thoughts with the gift of the god of mind. She was sincere, cautious but sincere, and she was hiding something important that she wasn't ready to reveal yet. Talk about what? About why you're really here. About those 5 marks on your soul that burn with divine light. About whether you're an ally or just another threat we need to eliminate. Cain raised an eyebrow. You can see that? The woman's smile widened. I can see a great many things. The question is, what do you want me to see? After a moment, Cain made a decision. He pulled out a chair and gestured for her to sit. Then let's talk. Her name was Alara, and she had been fighting the heroes for longer than she cared to remember. Not personally fighting, of course. That would be suicide. But working in the shadows, gathering information, coordinating cells, keeping the flame of resistance alive even when it seemed hopeless. She had been born into the movement. Her grandfather had been one of the original opponents of the heroes back when their corruption first became apparent. Her father had continued the work until he was captured and executed for heresy. Her mother had died of grief shortly after. Alara had been 12 years old when she swore to destroy the monsters that wore the heroes' faces. We have cells in every major city, she explained, sipping the tea that Kind had prepared. We have members in the church, in the governments, in the military. We've been building our strength for generations, waiting for the right moment. And when is the right moment? Alara's face darkened. We thought it was 20 years ago. We launched an uprising in 3 kingdoms simultaneously. We thought we were ready. What happened? The hero flames burned the entire eastern seaboard to ash. 30,000 people died in a single night. After that, she paused to collect herself. We learned to be more patient, more careful, more willing to wait for the opportunity instead of trying to create it. Kind nodded slowly. He understood that kind of caution. He had seen many operations fail because someone got impatient and moved before the conditions were right. But something has changed, Ilara continued. The heroes are growing more erratic, more desperate. There are signs that their power is beginning to fade, or at least plateau. For 3 centuries, they've been functionally immortal, but nothing lasts forever. Not even gods. You think they're dying? I think they're afraid of dying, which means they're taking risks they wouldn't have taken before, making mistakes they wouldn't have made before, and that creates opportunities for people like us. She leaned forward, her eyes intense. You have gifts from the Divine Council. I can see them burning in your soul like 5 small suns. The gods themselves have chosen you to deal with the heroes. That's more than we've ever had on our side. Kind considered this. You want me to work with your resistance? I want you to understand that you don't have to do this alone. Yes, you have power. Yes, you have skills. But the heroes have had 300 years to fortify their positions. They have armies, churches, entire nations that worship them. You can't just walk up to them and put a knife in their backs. Actually, Kind thought, that's exactly what I'm good at. But he didn't say it out loud. She had a point. Even with his gifts, taking on all 5 heroes would require more than just combat ability. He would need information, resources, distractions, all things that the resistance could potentially provide. What do you want in exchange? Just one thing. When you move against a hero, give us advance warning. Let us prepare our people. Let us be ready to fill the power vacuum before someone worse takes over. Kain thought about this for a long moment. It was a reasonable request. Killing a hero without considering the aftermath would just create chaos that might hurt more people than the hero had. Agreed, he said finally. Ilara's expression shifted to something almost like hope. Then, welcome to the Resistance, Kind Blackwood. Or whatever your real name is. Does it matter? No. All that matters is that we finally have a weapon capable of killing gods. Now let's talk about how we're going to use it. Over the following weeks, Alara introduced Kind to the Resistance's network of informants and operatives. He was impressed by both its reach and its secrecy. 3 centuries of oppression had taught these people how to hide, how to communicate without being detected, and how to keep their membership completely compartmentalized. Through this network, he began to gather detailed intelligence on each of the 5 heroes, their daily routines, their security arrangements, their known weaknesses, their relationships with each other, which turned out to be far more complicated than he had expected. The heroes were not a unified front. They barely tolerated each other, each one convinced that they deserved to rule the entire continent rather than just their portion of it. The only thing that kept them from open warfare was the knowledge that such a conflict would likely destroy all of them. The hero of flames, Aldrich, was the most overtly aggressive. He ruled through terror, burning anyone who opposed him and demanding absolute obedience from his subjects. But his temper was also his weakness. He was prone to rash decisions when angered, and several informants reported that he had been growing increasingly paranoid recently, suspecting plots against him in every shadow. The hero of light, Celestine, was more subtle. She ruled through faith, positioning herself as a benevolent goddess who only punished the wicked. But the resistance had documented hundreds of disappearances linked to her church, people who had asked too many questions or expressed the wrong opinions. She had built a network of inquisitors who rooted out heresy with terrifying efficiency. The hero of Shadows, Marcus, was an enigma. Even the resistance best informants couldn't pinpoint his exact location. He moved constantly, never staying in one place for more than a few days. His criminal empire ran itself through a hierarchy of lieutenants who had never actually met their boss. Killing him would require finding him first, which seemed nearly impossible. The hero of Storms, Tobias, was perhaps the most openly tyrannical. He demanded tribute from coastal nations, and when they couldn't pay, he sent hurricanes to devastate their cities. His floating fortress was considered impregnable, protected by perpetual thunderstorms that destroyed anything that tried to approach. And the hero of Earth, Gaia, had simply removed herself from the rest of the world. Her mountain kingdom was sealed behind walls of solid stone, accessible only through carefully guarded passes. Her subjects worshipped her as the source of all life, and in many ways they weren't wrong. She had become so connected to the earth itself that she could sense any movement within her territory and reshape the landscape at will. 5 heroes, 5 completely different challenges, and Kine needed to eliminate all of them. He decided to start with Aldrich. The hero of Flames was the most dangerous in terms of raw power, but his temper made him predictable. If Kine could get close enough without being detected, he could end the threat quickly and decisively. The Ashlands were exactly as unpleasant as their name suggested, a volcanic wasteland where the ground itself seemed to hate living things. Rivers of lava carved channels through fields of black glass. The air was thick with ash and sulfur. And at the center of it all sat Aldrich's fortress, a massive structure of obsidian and iron that had been built on the rim of an active volcano. According to Resistance intelligence, Aldrich rarely left his fortress anymore. He spent most of his time in his throne room, receiving tribute and dispensing judgment to those foolish enough to attract his attention. His guards were fanatically loyal, chosen specifically for their willingness to die for their master. But every fortress has a weakness. Every ruler has a vulnerability, and Aldrich's was his ego. Once a month, Aldrich held a public court where anyone could come and petition him for justice. It was a farce, of course. The hero almost always ruled in favor of whoever had brought in the largest gift, but it was also the only time when non-soldiers could get inside the fortress. Kane spent 2 weeks preparing for the infiltration. He crafted a merchant identity with enough wealth to justify a substantial gift. He memorized the layout of the fortress from resistance maps. He practiced activating his shadow abilities in the heat of the Ashlands, learning how to maintain them even when the constant firelight threatened to banish every shadow. On the day of the public court, he entered the fortress with 24 other petitioners. The guards were thorough but not paranoid, more concerned with checking for weapons than looking for invisible assassins. Kine passed through their checkpoints without incident, hiding in plain sight. The throne room was a monument to Aldrich's ego. Massive tapestries depicted his greatest victories. Statues of solid gold showed him in various heroic poses, and at the far end, sitting on a throne that blazed with perpetual flames, sat the hero himself. Aldrich had not aged well, despite his immortality. His face was twisted with centuries of unchecked anger. His eyes burned with literal fire, a side effect of absorbing too much flame magic over the years. His body was massive, muscled like a warrior's but somehow wrong, as if the proportions had been subtly distorted by power. He looked at the assembled petitioners with obvious boredom, clearly counting the moments until he could return to whatever entertainments occupied his private time. Kane waited. He let others go before him, studying Aldrich's reactions, learning his patterns. The hero paid almost no attention to the petitioners themselves. He glanced at their gifts, made arbitrary rulings, and moved on. His guards were the ones who paid attention to potential threats. When Kane's turn came, he approached the throne with the measured steps of a merchant trying to appear confident but not arrogant. He held up his gift, a chest of rare fire rubies that had cost the resistance a small fortune. Aldrich barely glanced at it. "What do you want, merchant?" Kane began to explain a fictional trade dispute, his voice droning in the manner of someone delivering a rehearsed speech. Aldrich's attention wandered almost immediately. "I tried to confront a Manasseh. That was when Kain activated his gifts. The shadow gift came first, dimming the flames around him just slightly, creating pockets of darkness where none should exist. Then the blade gift, as the hidden daggers in his sleeves slid into his hands with practiced ease. Then the death gift, as he pinpointed the exact location of Aldrich's heart behind all that muscle and flame. He moved. In his previous life, Cain had been fast, but with his new body and divine gifts, he was something beyond fast. He crossed the distance between himself and the throne in an eye blink, daggers already in motion, targeting the spots where no mortal armor could protect. Aldrich's eyes widened in shock. For the first time in 3 centuries, someone had gotten close enough to actually threaten him. Then the flames erupted. Cain had known it was coming. He had planned for it. But the sheer intensity of Aldrich's defensive response exceeded even his expectations. A wall of fire exploded outward from the hero's body, incinerating everything within 10 feet. Petitioners screamed as they died. Guards were reduced to ash in an instant. But Cain wasn't there anymore. The shadow gift had whisked him away at the last instant, depositing him in the darkest corner of the throne room. His clothes were smoking, his skin red from the heat, but he was alive. His daggers, however, had found their marks. Both blades were embedded in Aldrich's chest, not deep enough to be immediately fatal, but enough to disrupt his concentration. The constant fire that surrounded him flickered and dimmed. "You," Aldrich snarled, reaching for the daggers. "You dare?" Cain didn't respond. He was already moving again, another pair of blades appearing in his hands. The poison gift was active now, coating the weapons with a toxin specifically designed to counter fire magic. If even a drop got into Aldrich's bloodstream, it would begin suppressing his abilities. The fight that followed was unlike anything Cain had experienced in his previous life. Aldrich was no ordinary opponent. He was a 300-year-old demigod who had burned armies to ash and razed cities to the ground. His flames were everywhere, filling the throne room with an inferno that would have killed any normal person in seconds. But Cain wasn't normal anymore. He danced through the shadows, appearing and disappearing, striking whenever Aldrich's guard dropped. Each cut was shallow, but delivered more of the poison. Each attack forced the hero to expend more energy on defense. Aldrich roared in frustration, unleashing blast after blast of concentrated fire. But his flames were growing weaker. His movements were growing slower. The poison was doing its work. "What are you?" the hero demanded. "What are you?" Cain appeared directly in front of him, close enough to look into those burning eyes. "I'm the one who's going to kill you. The one who's going to kill all of you." He drove both daggers into Aldrich's throat. The hero of flames died with a gurgling scream, his fires extinguishing as the life left his body. For a moment, the throne room was silent except for the crackling of dying flames. Then the fortress began to shake. The volcano was erupting. Without Aldrich's constant suppression, centuries of pent-up pressure were finally finding release. The fortress would be buried under lava within minutes. Cain didn't stay to watch. He grabbed one of Aldrich's enchanted rings as proof of the kill, then activated his shadow gift and fled through the chaos. Behind him, the greatest threat Therion had ever known was being claimed by the very element he had once controlled. 1 down, 4 to go. News of Aldrich's death spread across the continent like wildfire. The resistance cells erupted in carefully controlled celebration, while the remaining heroes reacted with a mixture of shock and fury. The hero of light, Celestine, declared a continent-wide state of emergency. Her church launched the largest inquisition in history, searching for the assassin who had struck down her fellow hero. Thousands were arrested on suspicion, hundreds were executed without trial, but they never found Cain. He was already gone, moving through the shadows toward his next target, leaving no trace of his passage. Elara contacted him through magical means 3 days after the assassination. "You actually did it," she said, her voice filled with wonder. "You killed a hero." "The first one," Cain replied. "There are still 4 more. The others are mobilizing." Marcus has tripled his security. Tobias has surrounded his fortress with permanent storms. Gaia has sealed her kingdom completely. And Celestine is turning the entire church into a weapon against you. Good. Good. They're going to tear the world apart looking for you. Let them look. While they're focused on finding an assassin, they won't be paying attention to other threats. Tell yourselves to start preparing. The chaos after each death is going to be our opportunity to change things. There was a long pause. You've done this before, not killing heroes, but destabilizing power structures. In my previous life, I called it regime change. Different world, same principles. The powerful protect themselves with systems. If you want to remove the powerful, you have to break the systems first. Alara was silent for a moment. Who were you in your previous life? Kind considered how to answer. I was the shadow that governments feared. I was the knife that cut the strings of puppet masters. I was the last thing a lot of very powerful people ever saw. And now I'm the same thing, just in a different world with different targets. The heroes think they're gods. I'm going to show them that even gods can die. The hunt continued, but hunting the remaining heroes would prove far more challenging than eliminating Aldrich. The hero of flames had been arrogant, predictable, anchored to his fortress like a dragon guarding its hoard. The others were different. They had seen what happened to their colleague. They knew that something was out there that could actually hurt them, and they were adapting. Kane spent the next month gathering intelligence on his remaining targets, using the Resistance's network to piece together a comprehensive picture of their defenses and vulnerabilities. The Hero of Light presented a particular challenge. Celestine had transformed her church into a surveillance apparatus that rivaled anything Kane had seen in his previous life. Every city, every town, every village had its informants. Every suspicious stranger was reported. Every rumor was investigated. She was using the infrastructure of faith to hunt him, turning billions of believers into a continent-spanning early warning system. But Celestine had a weakness that Aldrich had not. She cared about appearances. She needed to be seen as righteous, benevolent, divine. Her entire power structure depended on people believing that she was a goddess of light and mercy, which meant there were things she had to hide. The resistance had documented dozens of cases where the church had made people disappear. Heretics, they called them, sinners who had strayed from the light. But the truth was more complicated. Some of those disappeared people had simply asked inconvenient questions. Others had witnessed things they shouldn't have seen, and a few had discovered secrets that threatened to expose the church's true nature. One of those secrets was the purification chambers. Deep beneath the Grand Cathedral in the holy city of Solaris, Celestine maintained a network of underground facilities where the church conducted its most classified operations. According to Resistance intelligence, this was where heretics were actually taken, not to be executed as the public believed, but to be processed. What does that mean? Kane asked Galara when she explained this. We're not entirely sure, she admitted. Our informants have never been able to get inside the deepest levels. But we've heard rumors, screaming that goes on for days. People who emerged changed, their personalities erased, their memories gone. Loyal servants of the church who have no recollection of ever being anything else. Kind's jaw tightened. Mind control. Something like it. Celestine's light magic can do more than just burn and blind. At its highest levels, it can purify thought, cleanse memory, remake a person from the inside out. This changed his approach significantly. If Celestine could remake minds, she could potentially defend against his assassination attempt by simply forcing him to forget why he had come. He would need to strike fast and hard, giving her no opportunity to use her powers. But first, he needed to get inside Solaris, and that meant dealing with the Inquisition. The church's elite investigators were a problem unto themselves. Unlike ordinary guardsmen or soldiers, the inquisitors were trained specifically to detect and counter threats like him. They had access to holy artifacts that could pierce illusions and reveal hidden enemies. They had techniques that could sense killing intent and hostile magic, and they answered directly to Celestina herself, making them incorruptible by ordinary means. Kind spent 2 weeks studying their methods, shadowing Inquisitor teams as they conducted their investigations. He learned their protocols, their weaknesses, their blind spots, and he discovered something interesting. The Inquisitors were good at finding external threats. They were less good at finding threats that came from within. The church had a hierarchy. At the top was Celestine herself. Below her were the archbishops, each responsible for a different region of the continent. Below them were the bishops, then the priests, then the acolytes. Each level had its own secrets, its own ambitions, its own resentments. Archbishop Mordecai of the Eastern Diocese was one of the most powerful men in the church. He was also, according to resistance intelligence, one of the most corrupt. He had been skimming tribute for decades, building a private fortune that would shame some kings. He had also been providing sanctuary to a number of wanted criminals in exchange for a portion of their profits. More importantly, Archbishop Mordecai had access to the Grand Cathedral. He visited Solaris regularly for conclaves with the other archbishops. And he traveled with a retinue of servants who were rarely subjected to the same scrutiny as ordinary visitors. Cain decided to have a conversation with the archbishop. The conversation took place in Mordecai's private chambers, late at night, after the archbishop had dismissed his guards and settled in for an evening of counting his ill-gotten gains. Cain appeared from the shadows like a ghost, one dagger already at the fat man's throat before he could cry out. "Archbishop Mordecai," Cain said softly, "we need to talk." Archbishop's face went through several emotions in rapid succession: terror, confusion, calculation. "Who are you? What do you want?" "I'm the one who killed the hero of flames. And I'm gonna kill the hero of light next. You're gonna help me." Mordecai's eyes went wide. "You're insane. Celestine is a goddess. She can't be killed." Aldrich thought the same thing. Look how that worked out for him. The archbishop swallowed hard, his multiple chins wobbling. "What do you want from me?" "Access to the Grand Cathedral. Specifically, access to the areas that ordinary visitors can't reach." "You're going to take me with you to the next conclave." "That's impossible. Security will be tripled after what happened to Aldrich. Every servant will be vetted, every guest questioned, every shadow searched." Cain smiled coldly. "Then you'd better make sure I'm not found. Because if I am, the first thing I'm going to tell the Inquisitors is where you've been hiding your money and your criminal friends, and the bodies of those priests who discovered your secrets and had unfortunate accidents." The archbishop's face went pale. "How do you know about that?" "I know everything, Archbishop. I know about the bribes. I know about the murders. I know about your little arrangement with the slavers in the southern ports. I know things that would get you burned at the stake if they became public." He leaned closer, his eyes as cold as winter ice. "So here's what's going to happen. You're going to help me get into the Grand Cathedral. You're going to provide cover for my movements. And in exchange, I won't destroy everything you've built. Do we have an understanding?" Archbishop Mordecai looked into those eyes and saw his death staring back at him. He nodded slowly. "We have an understanding." The conclave took place 3 weeks later. Cain entered the holy city of Solaris as one of Archbishop Mordecai's personal servants, wearing the plain robes of a church functionary and carrying documents that identified him as a scribe from the Eastern Diocese. The Inquisitors examined his papers, asked a few standard questions, and waved him through. Security was tight, but not as tight as he had expected. The church was more worried about external enemies than internal ones. They couldn't imagine that someone would have the audacity to infiltrate their holiest site with the help of one of their own archbishops. The Grand Cathedral was enormous, a structure that seemed to reach toward heaven itself. Its spires were plated with gold. Its walls were covered with stained glass depicting the heroic deeds of the five. Its halls echoed with hymns praising the divine beings who had saved the world. Cain moved through it like a shadow, memorizing layouts, noting guard positions, identifying potential escape routes. He had 3 days before the conclave ended. 3 days to find Celestine and put a knife in her heart. The Hero of Light spent most of her time in her private chambers at the top of the central spire. She emerged occasionally for public ceremonies and meetings with her archbishops, but she was always surrounded by a cordon of guards and inquisitors. Getting close to her during these appearances would be nearly impossible, but Cain had learned something interesting during his reconnaissance. Celestine had a habit. Every night, just before midnight, she would descend to the purification chambers alone. No guards, no servants. Just her and whatever poor souls were being processed that evening. It was her private ritual, her way of staying connected to the source of her power. The light she wielded came from the faith of her followers, but it was amplified by the suffering of those who had been purified. Each mind she broke, each personality she erased, each soul she remade in her image added to her strength. On the second night of the conclave, Kain made his move. The purification chambers were hidden behind a series of concealed doors and magical wards. Ordinary servants had no idea they existed. Even most of the priests who worked in the cathedral didn't know about the horrors that took place beneath their feet. But Mordecai had given Cain the passwords and the bypass codes. The archbishop was too terrified to do anything else. Cain descended into darkness, leaving the light and music of the cathedral behind. The air grew cold and damp. The walls changed from marble to rough stone, and the sounds changed too. Hymns and prayers gave way to something else, something that made even a veteran killer like Cain pause. Screaming, distant but unmistakable. The screaming of people whose minds were being torn apart and rebuilt. He followed the sounds deeper into the earth, moving through corridors that hadn't seen sunlight in centuries. He passed cells where broken people sat staring at walls, their eyes empty, their personalities gone. He passed chambers full of strange equipment designed for purposes he didn't want to imagine. And finally, he reached the heart of the complex. The chamber was vast, lit by a single column of pure white light that descended from somewhere far above. In the center of that light stood a woman who seemed to be made of radiance itself. Her skin glowed. Her hair floated as if underwater. Her eyes were two pools of liquid silver that saw everything and judged everything. Celestine the Radiant, the hero of light, 300 years old and more powerful than ever. At her feet knelt a young man, perhaps 18 years old, who was weeping silently as she laid her hands on his head. Light was flowing from her fingers into his skull, erasing whatever he had been and replacing it with whatever she wanted him to become. I wondered when you would come, she said without turning around. I felt you the moment you entered my city, a darkness moving through my light, a shadow where there should be none. Cain didn't respond. He was already analyzing the chamber, looking for angles of attack, calculating distances and timing. You killed Aldrich, she continued. That was impressive. He was always too arrogant for his own good. But you won't find me so easy to dispatch. She finished her work on the young man, who slumped to the ground with empty eyes and a peaceful smile. Then she turned to face Cain, and he finally understood why she was considered the most dangerous of the 5 heroes. The light wasn't just around her, it was part of her. She had absorbed so much holy energy over the centuries that she had become something more than human. Her body was made of compressed radiance. Her thoughts moved at the speed of light itself. You can't hide from me, she said, and suddenly there were no shadows in the chamber. Every dark corner was illuminated. Every possible hiding spot was revealed. Cain felt his shadow abilities being suppressed. The gifts from the god of shadows were being overridden by Celestine's superior power. For the first time since arriving in this world, he felt truly vulnerable. But he wasn't helpless. The shadow gift was only one of many tools at his disposal. I don't need to hide, he said, drawing his daggers. I just need to kill you. Celestine laughed, and it was the sound of bells ringing in an empty cathedral. You're welcome to try, she attacked. The light moved with her, becoming solid, becoming sharp, becoming 1,000 weapons striking from every direction at once. Cain's body moved on instinct, the gift from the god of blades allowing him to parry and deflect attacks that should have been too fast to see. But he was being pushed back. Each second of the fight cost him ground. Each exchange of blows left him with new cuts and burns. Celestine's power was overwhelming, a tsunami of light that threatened to drown him. He needed to change tactics. The poison gift, he thought, activating the blessing from the goddess of poison. His daggers began to drip with a substance that looked like liquid darkness, anti-light toxin specifically designed to counter holy magic. If even a drop of this gets into your bloodstream, Cain said, it will start eating away at your light from the inside. You'll become mortal again, vulnerable, killable. Celestine's attack pattern changed. She became more cautious, more defensive. The thought of losing her power clearly terrified her more than the thought of death. That gave Cain an opening. He pressed the attack, using the gift from the god of mind to predict her movements by reading her surface thoughts. She was going to dodge left. He threw a dagger right. She was going to create a barrier. He came in low. Under her guard, the first cut opened a line across her forearm. The second sliced through her robes and drew blood from her side. The third, the fourth, the fifth, each one delivering more of the anti-light poison. Celestine screamed, and the light in the chamber flickered. The perpetual glow surrounding her body began to dim. Her movements grew slower, more human. "What have you done?" she demanded, looking at her hands as the radiance faded from them. "What have you done to me?" "I've made you mortal," Kine replied, "just like everyone you've tortured in these chambers." He struck. The final blow came from above, a descending strike that pierced through Celestine's weakened defenses and drove both daggers into her chest. She looked down at the hilts protruding from her body with an expression of complete disbelief. "I am divine," she whispered. "I am a goddess." "You were a hero," Kine corrected. "You were supposed to save people. Instead, you became a monster, and monsters need to be put down." The light went out of Celestine's eyes. Her body collapsed, no longer sustained by the power she had wielded for 3 centuries. 2 down, 3 to go. The death of Celestine sent shockwaves through every corner of Therion. The church went into chaos. Bishops and priests who had been secretly unhappy with Celestine's rule began maneuvering for position. The Inquisition turned on itself as each faction blamed the others for failing to protect their goddess. And in the midst of this chaos, Kine disappeared. He left Solaris through secret tunnels that Mordecai had shown him, emerging in the countryside 50 miles from the holy city. The archbishop would keep his silence, too afraid of what Kine knew to ever reveal his involvement. The next target would be the most difficult yet. Marcus the Unseen, the hero of shadows, the master of the criminal underworld. Unlike Aldrich and Celestine, Marcus had no fixed location. He moved constantly, never staying in one place for more than a few days. His organization was compartmentalized so thoroughly that even his highest lieutenants didn't know where he was at any given moment. Finding him would require a different approach. Kane reached out to Alara through their secure magical communication. "I need information on Marcus's organization, not where he is, where his money goes." There was a pause as she processed the request. "His money? He controls half the criminal activity on the continent? His money goes everywhere, then follow it back to its source." "Every criminal empire has a treasury. Somewhere he keeps his wealth secure. Find that, and I'll find him." It took the resistance 2 months to piece together the information Kane needed. During that time, he didn't stay idle. He continued to gather intelligence on the remaining heroes, learning their patterns and vulnerabilities. And he began to notice something interesting. The 3 surviving heroes were communicating with each other more frequently. Messengers passed between the floating fortress of Tobias and the mountain kingdom of Gaia. Marcus's agents were seen meeting with church officials who had remained loyal to Celestine's memory. They're planning something, Alara confirmed during one of their communications. "We've intercepted fragments of their discussions. They're terrified. They know you're coming for them, and they're trying to coordinate a response." "What kind of response?" "We're not sure, but it seems to involve some kind of weapon, something they've been keeping in reserve for emergencies." Kane filed this information away. He would deal with it when the time came. For now, he had more immediate concerns. The resistance had finally located Marcus's treasury. It was hidden in plain sight, disguised as a merchant bank in the trading city of Portmore. The bank appeared legitimate on the surface, handling loans and deposits for the city's commercial community. But beneath its respectable facade, it served as the central hub for Marcus's criminal empire. All of his operations eventually filtered their profits through this bank. All of his lieutenants received their payments from its vaults. All of his secrets were stored in the ledgers that only the bank's inner circle could access. If Kine wanted to draw Marcus out, this was the way to do it. He spent 3 weeks planning the operation. The bank had security that would impress any modern military. I started a commerce at the base of Cappy, so I could afford to Cappy's own business with helpful committing, armed guards, magical wards, detection systems that could sense hostile intent before an attacker even reached the door. But Kine had learned that no security system was perfect. There were always gaps, always vulnerabilities, always human factors that could be exploited. The bank's chief security officer was a man named Darius Thorne, a former military commander who had retired to the private sector after a scandal involving the death of civilians under his command. He was competent, professional, and utterly devoted to his job. He was also having an affair with one of the bank's accountants. Kine didn't kill either of them. That wasn't necessary. He simply arranged for evidence of their relationship to fall into the hands of Darius's wife, a formidable woman who immediately began divorce proceedings. The resulting scandal and family crisis distracted Darius from his duties at a critical moment. That moment was when Kine struck. He entered the bank during the height of business hours, disguised as a wealthy merchant with business to conduct. He passed through the public areas without incident, made his way to the secure wing using a key he had obtained from a bribed employee, and descended into the vault level before anyone realized something was wrong. The vault itself was protected by magical locks that required specific incantations to open. Kine had spent weeks learning those incantations from a captured lieutenant who had been very motivated to cooperate after Kine demonstrated exactly how much he knew about applied anatomy. The door swung open, revealing a treasure trove that would make a dragon weep with envy. Gold, gems, magical artifacts, ledgers containing the names and locations of every operative in Marcus's organization. But Kine wasn't here for the treasure. He was here for one specific item, a communication crystal that Marcus used to coordinate his empire. According to Resistance intelligence, this crystal was the only one that connected directly to Marcus himself. All other communications went through intermediaries. He found it in a locked case at the back of the vault, a small black gem that pulsed with subtle energy. He picked it up and spoke a single word, "Hello." There was a long pause, then a voice emerged from the crystal, cold and controlled.
"You must be the one who killed Aldrich and Celestine." "I am."
You've made quite an impression. The underworld hasn't been this exciting in centuries. Kane allowed himself a small smile. "I'm glad I could provide entertainment. Is that why you're calling? To gloat?" "No, I'm calling to offer you a choice. You can keep running and hiding, and I'll eventually find you and kill you. Or you can face me directly and take your chances in combat." A long pause. "Why would I choose to fight you directly when running has kept me alive for 3 centuries?" "Because you're not just running from me, you're running from Tobias and Gaia too. You've been betraying them for years, haven't you? Skimming from their tribute, selling information about their defenses to their enemies. They know, Marcus. They've always known. They just didn't have a reason to act on that knowledge before." "How do you know that?" "I know everything. I know about the assassination attempts you've arranged against Tobias. I know about the spies you have in Gaia's court. I know that if the other heroes find you before I do, they'll do worse than just kill you." Silence from the crystal. "So here's my offer," Kine continued. "Meet me somewhere of your choosing. Fight me one-on-one. If you win, I'll leave you alone and focus on the others. If I win, well, at least it will be quick. Better than what Tobias has planned for you." Another long pause. Then, "Why should I trust you?" "You shouldn't, but do you have a better option?" The silence stretched for nearly a minute. Then Marcus spoke again, and there was something like respect in his voice. 3 days. The abandoned temple in the Shadowmere Valley. Just you and me. I'll be there." The crystal went dark. Shadowmere Valley was exactly as ominous as its name suggested. A narrow gorge where sunlight never reached, eternally shrouded in mists that seemed to move with malevolent purpose. The abandoned temple at its heart had been built by a cult of darkness worshippers centuries ago, before the heroes had arrived and purged such groups from the continent. Now it served as a meeting ground for the two greatest shadow users in Therion. Kane arrived an hour early, scouting the area for traps and ambushes. He found several, all of which he either disabled or avoided. Marcus had promised a one-on-one fight, but that didn't mean he would keep that promise. As midnight approached, Kine felt a presence entering the valley. Not multiple presences, as he had half expected. Just one. Marcus had actually come alone. The hero of shadows emerged from the mist like a ghost, his form seemingly made of darkness itself. He was tall and thin, with features that were difficult to make out even when looking directly at them. His eyes were the only clear feature, 2 points of absolute darkness that absorbed light instead of reflecting it. You actually came, Marcus said. You actually came alone. I considered bringing backup, but then I thought, why not see what this assassin is really made of? If he kills me, at least I'll know the others don't stand a chance either. That's fatalistic. That's realistic. I've lived for 3 centuries, assassin. I've survived threats that would make you weep, but I've never faced anyone who killed 2 of my colleagues in less than 3 months. You're something new, something dangerous, and I want to understand what you are before I die. He drew a blade from the shadows themselves, a sword that seemed to be made of crystallized darkness. So let's dance. The fight was different from the previous two. Aldrich had been raw power, overwhelming force, fire, and fury. Celestine had been blinding light, overwhelming intensity, an assault on the senses. But Marcus was subtlety, misdirection, attacks that came from angles that shouldn't exist. Kind's shadow gifts from the god of shadows were useless here. Marcus controlled this element far more thoroughly than he did. Every shadow in the valley answered to the hero, becoming weapons, barriers, traps. But Cain had other gifts. The blade gift allowed him to parry attacks that came from impossible directions, his body moving in response to threats before his conscious mind even registered them. Death gift let him sense Marcus's life force, tracking the hero even when he became invisible to ordinary senses. And the mind gift revealed Marcus's strategies moments before he implemented them. He's going to create a shadow clone behind me, Kine realized, and then strike from the left while I'm distracted. He spun, ignoring the clone, and driving his dagger into the space where Marcus's real body was materializing. The blade found flesh, and Marcus grunted in pain as he was forced to become solid to avoid taking more damage. How? The hero demanded. How can you see through my techniques? Kine didn't answer. He pressed the attack, exploiting Marcus's momentary loss of concentration. The fight became a brutal exchange of blows, neither combatant able to gain a decisive advantage. Marcus was more experienced with shadow magic, but Cain's divine gifts gave him an edge that the hero couldn't match. Back and forth they went, through the ruined temple and out into the misty valley, leaving a trail of blood and destruction in their wake. Finally, after what felt like hours, Cain saw his opening. Marcus overextended on a thrust, leaving his side exposed for just a fraction of a second. It was enough. Cain's dagger found the gap in Marcus's defenses, sliding between ribs and piercing his heart. The hero of shadows looked down at the blade in his chest with something like wonder. I haven't felt pain like this in centuries, he whispered. It's about to end, Cain replied, along with everything else. Marcus smiled, blood trickling from his lips. The others will stop you. Tobias and Gaia together can destroy armies. You're just one man. I'm the man who killed you. That will have to be enough. He twisted the blade, and Marcus the Unseen died. 3 down, 2 to go. The deaths of 3 heroes in as many months created a power vacuum that threatened to tear Therion apart. Criminal empires collapsed as Marcus's lieutenants turned on each other. Religious factions within the church fought for control. Regions that had been under the hero's protection found themselves vulnerable to threats they had ignored for centuries. And through it all, the resistance worked to establish new structures, new leaders, new systems that didn't depend on the whims of immortal tyrants. But the final 2 heroes remained, Tobias and Gaia, the Storm King and the Earth Goddess. The most isolated, the most paranoid, the most powerful of the remaining 5, they had stopped hiding. Reports from across the continent spoke of massive military movements. Tobias's floating fortress had descended from the skies and was moving toward the center of the continent. Gaia's mountain kingdom had opened its sealed gates, and her armies were marching to meet her ally. They were combining their forces for a final confrontation, and they were using the weapon that Elara had warned about. It arrived in the form of a golden pillar that rose from the earth at the point where Tobias and Gaia's forces met, a pillar that pulsed with divine energy, the accumulated power of 3 centuries of worship channeled into a single devastating artifact, the divine judgment, Alara explained, her voice tight with fear. It was supposed to be a legend, a weapon the heroes created together in case Therion was ever invaded by forces beyond their ability to defeat. It draws power from every believer on the continent, from every prayer, from every act of faith. What can it do? It can destroy anything, anything. There's no defense against it, no shield that can block it, no power that can overcome it. Cain studied the reports, his mind racing through possibilities. There has to be a weakness. Why are there? The only weakness is the heroes themselves. The judgment requires all surviving heroes to operate it together. If even one of them is killed, weapon becomes unstable. Then I kill one of them before they can use it. How? They're surrounded by armies, protected by the most powerful magical barriers ever created, and the judgment is almost ready to fire. Cain was silent for a long moment, then, send me everything you have on the weapon's location and the hero's positions. I have an idea. The idea was insane. It was suicidal. It was exactly the kind of operation that Cain had been trained for his entire life. He would infiltrate the combined army, get close enough to one of the heroes to kill them, and escape before the resulting chaos could claim his life. Simple, impossible, necessary. The divine judgment stood at the center of a camp containing over 100,000 soldiers, the combined forces of Tobias and Gaia, along with remnants of Celestine's church militia and Marcus's criminal army, had gathered to create the largest military force Therion had seen in 3 centuries. All of it was there to protect 2 people. Tobias, a Thunderlord, sat on a throne of clouds at the highest point of his floating fortress, which now served as the command center for the entire army. He was a massive man, crackling with electrical energy, surrounded by storm clouds that followed him wherever he went. Gaia, the Unbreaking, stood on the earth below, her feet literally merged with the ground, sensing every movement within miles. She appeared as a woman made of living stone, her eyes glowing with the green light of nature's primal power. Together, they were pouring their combined energy into the divine judgment, preparing it to strike. Their target was the resistance. Alar's organization had finally grown bold enough to openly challenge the hero's rule, and Tobias and Gaia had decided that a demonstration was necessary. They were going to annihilate the largest resistance stronghold with the judgment, killing tens of thousands and breaking the back of the opposition once and for all. Cain had less than 12 hours to stop them. He entered the camp disguised as a supply wagon driver, one of thousands of merchants and craftsmen who had been conscripted to support the massive army. Security was tight, but the sheer scale of the operation created gaps that a single skilled infiltrator could exploit. He spent the first 6 hours working his way toward the center of the camp, using his shadow abilities to pass through checkpoint after checkpoint. The closer he got to the divine judgment, the heavier the security became. Magical wards, patrol patterns, detection spells that swept the area constantly. But he kept moving, closer, closer. 5 hours left. He reached the inner perimeter, the zone where only the most trusted soldiers were allowed. Here every face was known, every movement was watched. There was no way to pass through without being detected. Unless you weren't trying to pass through at all. Cain found a shadow that led upward, toward the floating fortress above. He poured every ounce of his shadow git into the climb, becoming one with the darkness, ascending through the air itself toward Tobias' sanctuary. 4 hours left. The fortress was a marvel of magical engineering, a structure that somehow remained aloft despite its massive weight. Its surface was covered with defensive enchantments that should have detected any intruder instantly, but Cain had spent 3 months studying these enchantments. He knew their patterns, their blind spots. Their weaknesses. He slipped through. 3 hours left. Inside the fortress, he moved like a ghost, avoiding patrols and magical sensors with practiced ease. His target was a throne room at the apex of the structure, where Tobias sat directing his portion of the divine judgment's power. He found the hero exactly where expected, seated on his throne of clouds, eyes closed in concentration as he channeled energy into the weapon below. Tobias, Cain said, stepping out of the shadows. The hero of storms opened his eyes. Lightning crackled around his body, ready to annihilate any threat. But then he recognized his visitor, and something interesting happened. He smiled. Finally, Tobias said, I was wondering when you would arrive. You knew I was coming? I knew you would try something. You've killed 3 of us. You weren't going to stop now. And the divine judgment was the perfect bait to draw you in. Cain's eyes narrowed. This is a trap. Of course it's a trap. Did you think we would simply sit here and wait for you to pick us off one by one? The divine judgment is real, but its true purpose isn't to destroy the resistance. Its true purpose is to destroy you. Lightning exploded from Tobias's body, filling the throne room with blinding, devastating energy. Cain threw himself to the side, barely avoiding the first strike, but the second caught him across the shoulder and sent him crashing into the wall. Pain. Real pain. The kind he hadn't felt since his death on Earth. You're strong, Tobias continued, rising from his throne. Stronger than any mortal should be. But you're still mortal, and I am the storm itself. He attacked again, and this time Cain was ready. The blade gift guided his daggers, allowing him to deflect lightning bolts that should have been impossible to parry. The death gift let him sense the exact moment when Tobias's attacks would arrive, giving him precious milliseconds to react. But it wasn't enough. Tobias was too powerful, too fast, too overwhelming. Cain was being pushed back, his body accumulating burns and wounds that his divine gifts couldn't heal fast enough. In another minute, maybe 2, he would be dead. Unless he did something desperate. The divine judgment, he thought. Tobias is channeling his power into it. If I can disrupt that connection. He reached out with his mind gift, not to read Tobias's thoughts, but to interfere with them, to introduce chaos into the hero's concentration. It worked better than he expected. Tobias screamed as his connection to the divine judgment was suddenly, violently severed. The feedback of interrupted magic tore through his body, disrupting his control of the lightning around him. For just a moment, the storm stopped. Cain moved. His daggers found their marks, one in Tobias's throat and one in his heart. The hero of storms looked at him with eyes full of shock and disbelief. How? He choked. The same way I killed the others. By being better than you. Tobias died. Below, in the army camp, the divine judgment began to pulse erratically. Without Tobias's portion of the power, the weapon was becoming unstable. Gaia screamed in rage, but it was too late. The accumulated energy had to go somewhere, and without proper control, it went everywhere. The resulting explosion destroyed the divine judgment, scattered the army, and carved a new canyon into the landscape of Therion. When the dust settled, Gaia was gone, fled back to her mountain kingdom, surrounded by the remnants of her forces. 4 heroes dead, 1 remaining. The final hunt would be the most difficult of all, but Cain was patient. He had all the time in the world, and Gaia the Unbreaking would not escape him. The confrontation with Gaia took another 6 months to arrange. The hero of Earth had learned from her colleagues' deaths. She had sealed her kingdom completely, becoming one with the mountains themselves. No assassin could reach her. No army could breach her defenses. She was prepared to wait out the remaining years of her immortality in absolute isolation. But Cain didn't need to reach her. He just needed to make her come to him. He started by destroying everything she cared about, her temples, her monuments, her connection to the outside world. One by one, he eliminated the structures and artifacts that linked her to her worshippers, weakening the flow of faith that sustained her power. Then he offered her a trade, her people, whom he had captured during his raids, in exchange for a personal meeting. No armies, no barriers, just 2 beings settling their business. Gaia accepted. They met on a plain of bare stone, far from any source of earth magic. Gaia had emerged from her mountains for the first time in months, driven by concern for her followers and rage at the man who had destroyed her world. She was as massive as reports had suggested, a giantess of living stone who towered over the landscape. Her eyes burned with the green fire of primal nature. Her voice shook the earth when she spoke. You have destroyed everything I built, she said. 3 centuries of work. 3 centuries of careful cultivation, gone. Cain stood before her without fear, his divine gifts pulsed with power, ready for the final battle. You had 3 centuries to be a hero. Instead, you chose to be a tyrant. This is the consequence. I saved this world. You enslaved it, and now you're going to die for it. The battle that followed was the most devastating Therian had ever seen. Mountains crumbled, plains became canyons, rivers changed their courses. Two beings of immense power clashing with everything they had. But in the end, the outcome was the same as it had always been. Kain was not just an assassin, he was a killer of heroes. And Gaia, for all her power, was just another target. The final blow came from behind, as Cain used the last of his shadow gift to appear where Gaia couldn't see him. His daggers, coated with the combined poisons of 5 different gods, found the crack in her stone form and drove deep into what passed for her heart. The hero of Earth fell, and the ground shook with her passing. 5 heroes, 5 deaths. The mission was complete. Cain stood among the ruins, looking at the body of the last tyrant. Around him, the landscape bore the scars of their battle. Behind him, the people of Therian were already beginning to rebuild. A new era was dawning. An era without heroes, without gods walking among mortals. An era where the people would have to save themselves. The divine council appeared before him as he stood there, the 12 gods manifesting from pure light. You have done well, the silver-haired goddess said, better than we could have hoped. The heroes are dead, Therian is free. What happens now? Cain asked. Now you have a choice. You can return to the void and rest. Or you can remain in this world and help guide it into the future. Cain considered this for a long moment. In his previous life, he had never thought much about the future. His work was about ending things, not building them. But this was a new life, a second chance. Maybe it was time to try something different. I'll stay, he said, but not as a hero, just as a man. The goddess smiled. That may be the most heroic thing you've ever said. And so Cain Ashford, the greatest assassin 2 worlds had ever known, began a new chapter, not as a killer of heroes, but as a protector of the world they had left behind. But that's a story for another time. If you've enjoyed this incredible journey and want to see what happens next in Kain's new life in Therian, make sure you smash that like button and hit subscribe. We've got more amazing manga and manhwa recaps coming your way, including stories of overpowered protagonists, epic revenge tales, and world-shattering adventures you won't want to miss. Drop a comment below and let me know which hero's death was the most satisfying. Was it the arrogant Aldrich, the self-righteous Celestine, the cunning Marcus, the overwhelming Tobias, or the unstoppable Gaia? Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one. We've got more incredible manhwa and manga recaps coming soon, including the complete story of what happens when the hero of light discovers just who and what is hunting her. Trust me, you don't want to miss it. Drop a comment below telling me which hero you think Cain should target next. Is it the paranoid Shadow Lord, the tyrannical Storm King, the isolated Earth Goddess, or the righteous Light Maiden who hides her crimes behind a mask of divinity? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.